everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm the CEO and co-founder with Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. We have worked with life science companies from across the globe over the past 14 years to help them with everything from virtual advisory boards, online medical education, digital investigator meetings. And since the launch of our award-winning Insight Events platform, we've also been helping pharmaceutical companies with their large corporate events, MSL and sales rep training, innovation hackathons, and everything in between. But most importantly at Impetus, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. And from these big, hairy, audacious conversations with some of the leading edge thinkers, digital provocateurs, and healthcare thought leaders, we can all work together to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. So I'm really excited to having one of these healthcare thought leaders with me at the table today. And this is actually Dr. Keith Thompson. He is a London, Ontario-based family physician, an adjunct community-based faculty research eligible clinical professor with the Department of Family Medicine. He's also the co-investigator in 2 virtual care studies and a clinical co-supervisor for a MyTax Accelerate grant within the University of Western Ontario. He is also interested in innovative technologies that are relevant to primary care and its workflows. And he was one of the initial Canadian physicians hired to consult with the Teladoc Best Doctors Canada startup team in February of 2018. Dr. Thompson was CMO for iTelemed starting in 2017, and he recently stepped into the role of CMO for a company called Nuralogix Corporation as of this past year in November. He maintains an active networking relationship and an advisory role with numerous health technology and pharmaceutical companies. Welcome, Dr. Thompson. So happy to have you on the show.
Yeah, Natalie, thank you. Very pleased to be here. And listen, shout out to you for providing a platform, right, for these kinds of discussions. And, people should know that you offer this service and allowing us to be able to chat about what's really important, right? Digital health is moving so fast. And honestly, thank you for that. There's not enough of you doing it, or if those that are doing it, sometimes there's a huge fee associated with. So yeah, thank you.
We're thrilled, and I'm super thrilled as well because I come from the pharmaceutical industry. I've dealt with physicians basically my whole life. I also have a clinical background. I was in treated cancer patients for a while, and you don't really see a lot of physicians moving into the entrepreneur world, let alone the digital space. Tell us a little bit about the trajectory and how you navigated your way into a chief medical officer role at a technology company.
Yeah, that's a story unto itself. A serial fail on my part. I've always had that entrepreneurial kick. Started with trying to do a marketing program through a local radio station, little snippets on health, and how I could syndicate this. Yeah, no go. Joined in later with a team who was competing with the X Prize, actually, if you remember, trying to get a suborbital aircraft. So I got involved in that as their chief medical officer, looking at the implications of space tourism. Yeah, that didn't fly, and had a little bit of an experience in the private health world with King's Health Center. Those of you who may recall in Toronto, and that what the flop that became, but trying to get corporate wellness programs. Long story short, I thought, okay, primary care, this is where I need to be. Just nose to the floor and keep working. Well, late in life, right, I discovered virtual care, telemedicine, and in that era when OTN really was the only gateway into that. And partnered with some other fellows locally, really trying to drive up the bar on virtual care technology, particularly telemedicine. And, we were looking at the concept of getting virtual care into the home or to the point of care. So there really was the technology at that point, and even pre-2017, where we could take the stethoscope, the otoscope, bring it to the patient and do an exam more than just what we could with video. And I saw such value in that, right? I thought, this is really the future. This is where this needs to go. And while working with iTelemed, along came this other company at Nuralogix, and facial scan and capturing vitals. And I'm like, whoa, what's with that? Immediately sort of saw the implications, right? That this is going to change how we can interact with our patients, certainly in a telemedicine encounter, let alone primary care and preventative care and all of that. So we kind of had a connection with the company, and their CEO, Marzio, and I had been chatting back and forth. And we were a startup and really pushing, and honestly, just not able to get enough traction to make that business model around how we might sustain a relationship with Nuralogix and get sort of volume related calls. But stayed connected, back and forth. And October 23rd, I get a connect call from Marzio. He's like, "Hey, Keith, just how are things going?" I'm like, "Oh, Marzio, like I'm pushing, man, but we're trying. It's not going as well as we should." And during that conversation, he said, "Keith, we really need a chief medical officer. Are you interested?" And I was like, "Well, let me think about it. Yeah, okay." Having to leave behind, right? But really, as I said, it was kind of exciting for me because I knew about this company and knew what they were trying to do. And I think it was just serendipitous timing, right? That we would reconnect, and they had a need, and I was keenly interested. So yeah, here we are.
Beautiful. Love it. First of all, I love the name Nuralogix. I think it's fantastic. And let's actually spend a couple of minutes double clicking on exactly what Nuralogix is. I mean, there's lots of different technologies, but you have a core focus. So tell us a little bit about what it is that you are doing.
Yeah, so the company started back in 2015. So Marzio Pazzoli and Dr. Kang Lee partnered over this technology, which the foundation of it really, Dr. Kang Lee, being a developmental psychologist, had looked at facial imaging and collecting blood flows through transdermal optical imaging. So really that technology is able to look at blood flow beneath the skin, and using advanced machine learning is able to do some calculations, because using the reflected light from the surface of our skin and capturing blood flow, we can actually measure very accurately the pulse wave. And that's a critical point. So if we can capture the pulse wave of what the heart is doing, there's a whole host of other features. And Dr. Kang Lee recognized that. And Marzio, being an electrical engineer, and his first company was RuggedCom that he sold to Siemens. So it was this great partnership, and Marzio had the financial resource to support further research, and Dr. Kang Lee had, the technology, the skills to advance this concept, which really became the foundational technology. So that capturing of that blood flow using this transdermal optical imaging, and as I said, since 2015, it's kind of been a trajectory, right, of all sorts of new things being discovered with that technology. But that would be the base core of what they do. The other side of it, the effective AI, right, which is a pun on, or double entendre on effective AI, but really looking at the aspects of human emotion. So whether it's a joy or stress, for example, there are physical changes within our blood flow, within our heart rate, that we can capture with the transdermal optical imaging, the TOI, I'll say for short. But then there's also the psychological components. So the company really has moved more into that marriage of the physical, right? Capturing stress and heart rate responses to stress and the physiology behind that. And kind of moving that forward into really the healthcare field, right? And looking at preventative care and looking at metabolic risk, for example.
So very interesting, Dr. Thompson. So obviously this company, Nuralogix, was established before the world turned upside down with the COVID-19 pandemic in a couple of years ago. Now, tell us a little bit about what the world looked like for Nuralogix before COVID and what it looked like after the pandemic. And, has it changed what you're doing, your focus? Did you have to pivot at all? And I'm assuming that with the incredible uptake of telemedicine, which existed for years and years before this, if there's been an explosion for Nuralogix.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been an explosion in interest, certainly, as well as new markets, right, expanding. And honestly, I think the challenge for Nuralogix will just be growing with the customer need and being able to increase that demand. Is really quite amazing. I knew less of the company kind of pre-2017, pre-COVID, but my involvement with the telemedicine implications of what they were doing, certainly allowing us to capture those parameters, right? Blood pressure, heart rate variability, breathing rate, all of that, being able to do a physical assessment, if you would, through remote contact. So pre-COVID, I can tell you we had a couple of trials that we had pitched, and we thought immediately early in COVID saw the value in using their COVID assessment tool, right, which was a questionnaire looking at the various COVID symptoms, and they had already begun applying some machine learning to that. Which would say, yeah, we can get some very accurate predictive analytics here with a yes/no classifier. Might you have COVID or might you not? Being able to identify those that most aptly met that COVID symptomatic score. But marrying that to the toy is where we wanted to go. And we thought, perfect, right? We can no touch contact. We can get facial imaging and measure blood flow that might correlate with what's going on related to COVID. So that's a program that right now, as I said, is kind of on the shelf, if you would, but in increased interest and demand in that. And I think that's something the company may end up revisiting very soon. So many of the other modules now that are being offered, of course, are holy grail, if you would, is the blood pressure. And we have just submitted, pre-submit rather, to FDA. So going through the process of that being a regulated type 2 class medical device, which will be very interesting. But the metabolic risk. So, it's recognized now with the research that the blood flow in the face and capturing those parameters, there's very specific patterns that now allow us to identify, does your scan, for example, match that of a population with high cholesterol or high triglyceride, or what might your blood sugar be, or your hemoglobin A1C, which is probably the next one to come out. So very shortly, we'll be able to do that scan, and we'll be able to classify, is this person above or below that clinical threshold, 5.7%, with incredible accuracy. Like already the models are performing really well. So I would say what COVID has done then really is push us more into how can we leverage these various metabolic parameters and be more or deeply involved, right, with that patient encounter without having to touch them, right, which is really kind of fascinating. So you think where this technology is going, what we can capture by a scan would take your nurse or your office assistant and going through lab results like 7 or 8 or more different chunks, right? You're trying to work out their Framingham risk, you're trying to work out their diabetic risk and all the 30-second scans. Like I still it still blows me away, right? I give my head a shake, but
we have actually just stepped off, a fairly controversial court situation with Theranos and sort of the all being, diagnostic testing that, one blood drop and, you can tell what's going on and with your genetics and everything, it's just kind of a crazy thing. How does this fare when you start using this and thinking about this as a medical device, as a medical diagnostic? Is there controversy associated with that? Are there some naysayers and negativity, or is this all sort of very utopian?
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be naysayers. There's still, even within the clinical realm, people that look at the platform and test it and they think, yeah, okay, what's really going on in the back end here, right? So first point is, remember the clinical application. We're not saying that this technology replaces a blood test or is meant to be as accurate as a lab value. What it does is preempt. It's able to predict risk. And so it's no different than your doctor going through and looking at your LDL and your systolic blood pressure and calculating your risk of heart disease. We can do that, right, with the models recognizing those transdermal optical image, that toy image, plus the demographic features. We can calculate risk. So it's really a prevention tool. It's an awareness tool, I think. And so that's maybe where, I won't say the controversy, but maybe where the hesitancy comes in, right? The blood pressure is different, right? And it's not predictive. The blood pressure is machine learning, recognizing that continuum of variables. So we've already applied to it the ISO AAMI standards to validate a device, and it's met that criteria, right? The mean error was less than plus or minus 5. Standard deviation was within 8 millimeters. So we're very excited. And even when it's starting to go out now to other populations and different skin tones, it's holding up really, really well. And that's why we felt it's ready to go. This, will meet the criteria. We hope to be able to validate with FDA. But that's not a prediction. That's going to be more a true measurement used in conjunction with your doctor, right? So we're not saying give this device and away you go. No, it'll always be, at least for now, under clinical supervision. And that's the perfect marriage. Like you've seen some of my posts on LinkedIn. Wow, I can't wait for the day when I can give the patient an app and no longer they have to have this device and go to the pharmacy and get their Omran or their oscillometric cuff. Just do it on your phone, right? And
Absolutely. I mean,
got
this
one.
sounds like a beautiful thing, and it just tied in so nicely with this large momentum and the groundswell around telemedicine and using, the synchronous virtual ability. And then, you're also thinking a lot about decentralized clinical trials, and you're thinking about this situation where there's a lot of hardware and this, pivoting, if you will, on the clinical trial endpoints and patient reported outcomes and a whole slew of other complications. And when you start thinking about shipping hardware and the cuffs and diagnostics and Bluetooth this and Bluetooth that, where does Nuralogix fit into all that layer of complication and the optimization for the future of decentralized clinical trials?
I'll be honest, I think I'm too early in this ship to predict that, but that's certainly an area that I know there will be expressed interest. And you talk about, real world evidence, right? And what are the ways that we could very easily gather what's going on post-market studies? You think of the signals as surveillance, right, for risk management systems within various pharmaceuticals being released. We can do almost everything with this phone, right? We can do the survey. We can do some of the physiologic and biologic parameters that we may be able to gather. And listen, I mean, Nuralogix may do the predictive risk, predictive analytics, and blood pressure. And there's other devices that are probably going to come along, right, that you see urinalysis done on your phone to determine if you have a UTI. So I think that we're definitely in the right lane to be involved in this. And when these clinical trials move more and more into the digital realm, we've got the platform, right, that we could partner up with or provide what they need and optimize really efficiency really is I think what's going to be key.
Absolutely. And let's actually just paint the practical picture of how this actually will work. So here you are, a patient, a person, a consumer of health who is going to have some sort of an interaction with a healthcare provider, somebody, an allied healthcare provider, what have you. So how exactly is that interaction going to be facilitated between me and my healthcare provider? And how does Nuralogix provide that bridge?
Yeah, so that's what excites me, because I think one of the struggles that we have in primary care is, that being able to touch every person every year over every possible problem that comes up, it's not going to work. There's already, we realize, way more patients and way more demand than there are providers. In our region, in Southwestern Ontario, we have 109,000 patients without primary care. Like, just think about that. Within our region, that's 1 in 5 people that don't have access to a primary care physician. So part, I think, of what's going to happen as we evolve will be that higher volume, lower physician touch. I think you're going to see more empowerment of patients. We're going to have programs that increase health literacy and even digital literacy, which we can talk about in a sec, because it's got to be equitable and there's got to be access. And that's a whole other topic we could book a session on. But really, the patients now will be able to determine and monitor, think of doing a weekly scan, right? Or repeated every couple of months, a scan says, oh, my risk of diabetes is going up, or, oh, look at my BMI, or look at my blood pressure seems to be upticking. I better check with my doctor about that. One of the challenges, of course, in doing that, you've already alluded to, and I've said, we need the physician care, right? So we need to be able to get people access to these devices and simplify the care of their own disease states and chronic disease management. but they still need the medical backup, and they still need some of the hands-on or face-to-face. And what that is going to look like, I will be honest, I think that's the challenge. That's where we need to crack code, because we somehow need to rely less upon doctor do it all. Every problem I have, my doctor's a point of contact. No, it's going to have to maybe look quite a bit different. And whether it's a layered system with nurse practitioners or who knows, and that may be hard, I think, for people to swallow, especially those like my own practice, for example. My patients, they want to see Dr. Thompson. They're not going to accept anyone else, right? It's a relationship I've had with them for 25, 30 years. But I think as we move into the next realm, it's going to have to be different. And so these tools really allow us as physicians to kind of pull back a little bit and give patients the ability to monitor their own risk or determine. And then it also can be that trigger, right? That brings them, I've got a problem, doc. Why is my triglyceride high? Or why is this reading funny on my scan? What's going on? So I think that's how it would kind of look in a primary care workflow.
So it's a very interesting world that we're living in right now, Dr. Thompson, because the thing is, in some ways, we have, in a very good way, become very patient-centric. Everything is centralized around the patient or the healthcare consumer, which is a fantastic thing. Now, the issue comes down to being inundated, right? Inundated with bits and data and information from all over the place. And again, the new gold is attention. Everybody wants and is ready to pay you for your attention. So we have smartwatches and wristbands, and we have 24-hour glucose monitors, and we have Aura rings, and this, that, and the other thing, and this and that app, right, is a new software as a medical device. How do we get the Nuralogix facial app, the toy, in the hands and the hearts of people? And in that same question is there an opportunity from a business model standpoint, enabling an interoperability with some of these other more widely circulated types of tools and apps and companies? And what is that going to look like?
Yeah, so, I think I hear in that question almost what are the difference between the various digital offerings, right? So no doubt what we're doing is a threat, if you would, to the wearables. Our technology is different. I do see where we're separated from is what we measure or what we predict, not just blood pressure, heart rate, SpO2. Metabolic profiling, really, right, is what would separate us from maybe the other programs that are out there. The other thing that separates us is, the ability, you mentioned the stream of data. So whether it's from a corporate wellness or whether it's from a population health model, imagine being able to capture these risks and profiles on tens of thousands of patients, and knowing within a region or knowing within a company where you're most at risk. Anonymized, of course, right? Because there's that controversy. Is it personal? No, this data would never identify a single patient. But as a group, we can now say, wow, look, this company has 40% of its population is hypertensive or at risk of diabetes. And how might that supplement how we target either privately funded corporate wellness programs or publicly funded, right, programs, and we can meet specific needs. So I think it's really a tool that all of these devices are tools for population health. And it's less about the one person in my office in front of me. I'm talking to you right now, and if we were dealing with whatever medical condition it is, you're right. You've got my full time, my full attention. But I can't think about just you and your chronic disease. I have to think of the 300 others within my practice, which is really a foundation of primary care, interestingly. If you look back at Ian McWhinney and some of the theories, right, on what family physicians do, we tend to think of not just the one person, but every one of our patients is at risk. And these tools, again, wisely incorporated into the workflow. And I won't say there's going to be, freedom of bumps along the road. We have to figure this out. But incorporating these tools into primary care really allows us to do that in an efficient way.
Yeah. And so it kind of does make me ask the question, the next inevitable question is, this sounds like a really phenomenal tool, with the predictability portion, the population health management component. My question has to do with the business model. Who's ultimately responsible to pay for this? And what does that look like, and who ultimately is your client?
Yeah. So right now our model is B2B, so business to business, with at the end the customer or the patient, right? So B to B to C. So the current models now would be approaching those corporations through employer health assessments, or a direct B to C. I would say is possible, but not an area that's been widely explored just yet. Because you're right, who would pay for that? We have some preliminary work that we're looking at in Africa, which is a unique sort of challenge, because very remote, rural, underserviced. How do you possibly fund that, and what does that look like? And that's been interesting, because there we now you understand the population health aspect. So it may be a regional health authority, and maybe not every person has a device, right? It may be a device in the hands of a community health worker who's specially trained, who goes out and services or has those encounters or does your scans or collects the data on that device for EMR. And there's already some models like that, say with Philips, for example, or Doctors at a Distance, I think is another one. Public Health Foundation of India. Lots of ways where that technology is leveraged. The funding comes in really to support the technology, but in the end, because you're reducing those risk, complications, hospitalizations, readmissions for those chronic diseases, the resources should be there to pay for the technology. Because really, the most expensive part is not the technology, right? It's being able to reduce the outcomes or avoid those outcomes, capturing people upstream.
Yeah, 100%. Of course, there's going to be lots of potential opportunities as well outside of, wellness programs and corporations, of potential partnerships. So some of these large, companies that already have some of these fundamental tools and what have you, potentially even physician consortiums or these online digitals like the Teledoc. I know in Canada they've got Maple. They might be looking at this as another potential tool. But fundamentally, that we're going to looking at clinical data. I know that you're already saying that you're potentially looking at this as, software as a medical device or as a digital tool for diagnostics. It's all going to be based on having the proper clinical data. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the research you've either done or current research to prove the point that this is truly a predictive or a prognostic tool?
Yeah, so I mean, the foundation of the modeling or training of that model is based on over 35,000, I think, last count, patient scans, and matching that clinical ground truth of their data to the toy model, right? And the scanning we've captured, and that's continuing to grow. So you mentioned that it's interesting. I think as the business model may evolve into these partnerships where further access to that anonymous data can just help build or grow or develop either new models, right? New features that we can detect or new conditions that we can diagnose using toy, or improving and validating the models as they currently exist. But really, the models aren't released until they're at least 80% accurate, and in blood pressure, it's a 95% based on those AMA ISO guidelines. So there's very rigid and clinical controls, right, around making sure that this model and technology does perform as we expect. Train the model, test the model with thousands of patients before it's set to release.
It's a very awesome tool, and I do have to say that there's a lot of legs here. There's a lot of opportunity, but I could also see that there may be some people with some reticence about the technology. We've heard recently, the whole debacle that's happened with a lot of facial recognition software, a lot of police forces. Even IBM has kind of moved away from that. There's in somewhat concerns about the sort of dystopic usage, especially when you talk about effective AI and being able to read people's emotions. I guess some people may even be concerned that companies like a Google might purchase your kind of software, put it in everybody's webcams and start reading people's emotions. Well, how do you speak to some of those concerns?
Yeah. So first up, facial recognition is not what we do. Right. So the landmarks are capturing those regions of interest to detect the blood flow. And it's really just to see where there's movement, do we have a proper signal? And so Nuralogix has never, nor would ever, and we know who's using this technology. It's web-based, we can monitor that. It's not being used for any kind of security purposes or reading intent. Foundationally, yes, as Dr. Kang had his original research was based on being able to determine when children develop that critical milestone of lying. If they don't develop it, there's a problem. But the way that technology has now since evolved, that's not part of the offering, and that's not, and the company's keenly aware of that. And yeah, it's just not going to happen.
Absolutely. And I guess the other thoughts here are, such a key essential part since COVID, the need to be able to access telemedicine, anything digital, your tools, your phone, this kind of an app, using Nuralogix. And at the end of the day, even like it's across the globe, it's not even just Africa, it's even Canada, it's the US. Not everybody has the infrastructure. In some ways, you almost have, inadequate infrastructure to be able to maintain or sustain this level of interaction and usability of some of these apps. How do you speak to the equalization, if you will, or the equitable distribution of this kind of advanced healthcare for people across the globe?
Yeah, so it's never going to be perfect. That's true. There's always issues of connectivity that we could improve. But if you look at just cell phone technology in general, I mean, World Health and I think World Bank Foundation has said that 70% of the 20% of the lowest income, so those 70% low income nations, 70% of the 20% lowest income have access to cellular technology. So really, the access to smartphones is really ubiquitous. Could it be greater? Yes, it's not 100% for sure. But I think also we're going to see people starting to think outside the box around the business model. There's a company in India, for example, Jio, that their mandate was to get that cell phone into every person's hands within their country. It was going to be free, and the data was going to be free. What they wanted was the ability to anonymously have access to certain data about diabetes or about blood pressure. I'm not saying that's something Nuralogix is going to do, but I'm just saying the model around supporting access to the technology or making that technology use, realize that the cost of dispersing that technology, this cost of increasing the connectivity into the community, into the regions, is far offset by what we reduce in terms of morbidity, mortality, and disease states. And so I think that's where regions probably have will and continue to learn. Northern Ontario, right? The telemedicine program there. If there's people that don't have cellular or access, they get their smart device with the little USB stick that gives them access to the cell network. And that more than is adequately paid for by keeping them out of a hospital, keeping them at home, preventing exacerbations of their disease. So we have a lot to do. That's a lot of my work with my work, but my involvement with IEEE. And check out that organization. I mean, this is their whole mandate, right? Technology for humanitarian purposes, and keenly aware that yes, not everyone has access to the network, to the internet, but if we can increase that access, we're certainly going to make strides, huge strides in managing disease.
Absolutely, 100% agree with you. We all have to make these movements in that forward direction, or we're never going to progress. Lots of exciting things on the forefront. Certainly, Nuralogix is, at the forefront and the precipice of some exciting frontiers. Curious about where the future lies with your company, especially around the idea of the future of remote teams and the idea around digital health technologies and impacting healthcare workflows. So what does that look like, and what are you most excited about for the future?
Yeah, so I think if you look at some of the foundational studies that Nuralogix has published, I think there's going to be continued growth in that area. I mean, there's 11 or 12 or more patents and 6 or so more pending. So the research now, I believe, is going to take us more into the clinical utility and perhaps looking at outcomes and various partnerships, maybe through further research. But I think the company is going to continue to grow in that offering towards managing those key conditions, the big three: blood pressure, diabetic risk. There's the hemoglobin A1C, metabolic syndrome. You can see already, right, where the biggest target and the biggest risk is really cardiovascular and all the conditions that might feed into that. The technology itself, I mean, there's discussions about, scanning and the optical sensor. So our current technology uses that ambient light and it calculates blood flow based on how much light is reflected and how much light is absorbed. But if that optical sensor now can actually do readings of specific molecules, and there's a program or sort of physics, basically, of transdermal optical imaging, but using hyperspectral sensing. So going outside the current wavelengths, and the implications for that are just incredible, right? Where now you might be able to do measurements of concentrations or actual levels of specific biomarkers within the blood. Now that's a long ways away, and as I said, not that Nuralogix would be deeply involved in that area of research, but this is just kind of pointing towards where this technology goes. And what's possible in the future, I think, is going to be incredible. Another big area currently we're focused is, we have the machine model for the DAS, so depression, anxiety, and stress score. And reducing that, we've published a paper on this, that 42 questionnaire can be reduced to 7 or 5 questions and much more efficient. But we also know there's specific heart rate variability and there's specific readings within that toy scan that might correlate, for example, with anxiety or perhaps even depression. Are there signals there, right? And so being able to marry those two, right, the toy scan with some of the psychological diagnoses or psychological profiling may also really increase access for mental health services. And I think that's going to be another fascinating area for sure.
It's really, really cool that you say that. I mean, companies like Muse, where they have the headband, you actually have a company called HeartMath, where they're checking your heart rate variability. This could potentially be a partner tool for a new meditation app or a company to detect how the meditation worked and how it might have actually changed your mood or your stress levels or your heart, your various other parameters as well too. So very, very intriguing.
Well, it's based on fetal stress monitoring, right? So that heart rate, the variability of that heart rate, and the various features we can recognize. So as I said, if you can capture that pulse wave, pretty incredible then what you can look at, right, in terms of what's going on. So we know there's that physiologic response in stress in various conditions. And so being able to recognize those patterns within those scans, I think we've only just begun to look under the hood, inside the magic box to see what's going on, for sure.
I am finding it absolutely thrilling. I think, Dr. Thompson, you joined it at probably an amazing time. I think that there's so much future, like you said, just scratching the surface with Nuralogix, and a very, very exciting time. For anybody who is listening and really intrigued and want to inquire, partner, discuss, have a myriad of other sorts of connecting points, we do have Dr. Keith Thompson's details in the show notes. So please look for that if you want to connect with him or the company Nuralogix. If you were interested in this discussion, we also encourage you to check out impetusdigital.com. These are the kinds of conversations that we have a lot with physicians, allied healthcare providers, payers, patients, all kinds of different stakeholders, where we connect people asynchronously and synchronously through a series of touch points to talk about digital transformation. What are you going to do with clinical trial protocols? How are you going to incorporate telemedicine into what you're doing, or perhaps even the Nuralogix app? So these are the kinds of discussions that we have. We'd love to hear from you as well. Thank you, everybody, for checking out the show. We encourage you to like and subscribe, and please leave us some feedback on iTunes. Thanks for all your time. Dr. Keith Thompson, this was a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much.